Okay, imagine this. A major federal move happens, and suddenly, these critical support systems in communities, the ones people really rely on, are under intense pressure. It's not a what-if scenario. This is happening right now.
Exactly.
We're talking about a really broad funding freeze and review initiated by the Trump administration. It affects thousands of nonprofits getting federal grants. And look, this isn't just, shuffling papers. It feels like a direct challenge to organizations doing essential work.
It really does.
Hmm.
And that brings us to the core question for this deep dive, doesn't it?
Yeah.
How do these big policy shifts, which are, let's be clear, aimed at pushing federal money in a specific direction, how do they hit the groups helping the most vulnerable?
Yeah.
And today, we're really focusing on those vital organizations that serve victims of domestic and gender-based violence.
And the fallout is already visible, right? We're seeing organizations scrambling. Some are even, editing their own websites and public info.
Absolutely, and facing just huge financial uncertainty. It's a precarious situation.
Plus, there's this surprising legal twist. A court actually stepped in to try and block some of these limits already.
Right, which adds another layer. So today we're going to get into not just what's happening, but really why this matters so much for community support, for individual safety, really across the board.
Okay, let's unpack this then. What's actually driving these changes? And just how wide is the net being cast here with these federal directives?
Well, the administration's stated goal is pretty clear. They want federal spending to align with the president's agenda.
Okay.
So this review, it specifically targets programs related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI. You hear that term a lot.
Right, DEI.
Also programs that recognize transgender and non-binary people, ones that support undocumented immigrants, or promote what the administration calls gender ideology or anything related to abortion service.
They've been pretty blunt about it.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
White House officials have used phrases like ending radical and wasteful government DEI programs and fighting gender ideology extremism.
And that term, gender ideology, what does that typically cover from their perspective?
Generally, when they use that term, it tends to refer to ideas about gender identity and expression that go beyond, let's say, traditional male-female definitions.
Got it. And this isn't just a small review, is it? You mentioned thousands of programs.
Not small at all. The Office of Management and Budget, the OMB, they're looking at roughly 2,600 different federal programs.
Wow, 2,600. That's huge. The potential impact seems massive.
It really is. And if we zero in on the grants directly affecting the gender-based violence groups we're focused on, the numbers are significant.
Like what kind of numbers?
Okay, so you've got grants from the Justice Department's Office on Violence Against Women, that's OVW. That totals around $480 million.
$480 million, okay.
And then there are programs under Health and Human Services, HHS, specifically their Family Violence Prevention area. That's another $261 million.
So combined, that's well over $500 million.
Easily. And what's really crucial here is that these big pots of money often contain specific grants for what they call underserved populations. Meaning groups like LGBTQ plus individuals, people with disabilities, also culturally specific groups, which are grants designed to help communities where mainstream services might not be as effective or accessible.
Right, tailored support. So those specific pots are under scrutiny, too.
Exactly. They seem to be a particular focus in this review.
Oh, okay, so that's the what's. Let's talk about the now. How is this actually hitting these organizations day to day? What are the immediate effects on their operations, their financial health?
Well, the immediate hit was intense financial strain. There was this temporary freeze period where many nonprofits just couldn't submit reimbursement requests.
So work they'd already done, money they'd already spent, they couldn't get paid back.
Exactly. Or even draw down funds that were technically already approved for them. And even now, there's this ongoing worry, this uncertainty about whether they'll actually get reimbursed for money that's already out the door. They're operating kind of on faith.
That sounds incredibly stressful. Can you give us some specific examples of how this is playing out?
Yeah, definitely. Take Kavita Mehra at Saki for South Asian survivors. She reported they have, get this, $1.94 million in federal reimbursements. Just pending.
Nearly $2 million.
Yes. And that money is tied directly to things like emergency housing for survivors, counseling, advocacy work. It puts all that at risk.
Wow.
Or look at Ginny Sue from Awaz, San Antonio. Her actual job depends on an HHS grant. She's worried these delays could mean they lose the rest of that grant money. Plus, they have another $400,000 grant pending, specifically for culturally specific services. Huge uncertainty there.
So it affects staffing, existing programs, future plans, everything.
Absolutely. And one more, Maria Tejer from Sahio, they fight female genital mutilation, FGMC. She pointed out that programs like training healthcare providers, running support groups for survivors, those rely heavily on federal funds. They get subgrants via HHS, about $13.2 million, and another $300,000 from OVW. It puts their core mission in jeopardy.
It really puts a human face on those big numbers, doesn't it? These aren't abstract figures. They're services people desperately need.
Precisely.
So facing this kind of pressure, what are organizations doing? You mentioned changes to websites. Are they actively trying to sort of fly under the radar or change their public image?
It seems like it, yes. We're definitely seeing signs of self-censorship, organizations modifying their websites very carefully.
Like how?
Well, the hotline, the National Domestic Violence Hotline, they actually took down a whole web page they had called Abuse in LGBTQ plus Communities.
Really? Why?
They said it was in anticipation of potential new guidance from HHS. They were trying to get ahead of any issues.
Proactive, but also concerning.
Very. And it's broader than that. About a third of the websites for state-level domestic violence coalitions apparently went offline for review.
A third? Wow.
Yeah. Dawn Dalton, she's the executive director at the D.C. Coalition Against Domestic Violence, DCKDVV. She confirmed their site was down temporarily.
Why?
To review all the language, make sure they were compliant with any potential new rules, but also, trying to figure out how to do that without stigmatizing the survivors they serve. It's a real tightrope walk.
That's a huge deal. These websites are often the first point of contact, right? A lifeline for people maybe afraid to make a phone call.
Exactly. If you're experiencing abuse, finding help online discreetly is often crucial. Losing these resources, even temporarily, makes it harder for people to connect.
So what's the alternative then, if the digital door is closed or harder to find?
Well, Dawn Dalton mentioned they're having to rely more on what she called analog systems.
Analog?
Like direct referrals, phone calls, basically moving away from the easy, often anonymous online access point.
Which sounds less safe, potentially, for someone whose abuser might be monitoring their calls or who needs to reach out discreetly.
It definitely creates more barriers, especially if someone can't speak freely or relies on that ability to search online without leaving an obvious trace. It narrows the path to help when accessibility is absolutely critical.
So when you put all this together, the funding squeeze, the self-censorship, the access issues, who ultimately bears the brunt of these changes? Who is most impacted?
Well, the impact seems to fall hardest on groups that are already facing significant barriers. We're talking about LGBTQ plus victims, undocumented immigrants, people with disabilities, and folks from specific cultural communities.
Because those targeted grants for underserved populations are under the microscope.
Exactly. Those tailored services are particularly vulnerable right now. And this really gets into human rights territory. Ginny Sue from Awas, San Antonio, she put it very bluntly. She said denying help to survivors is really heartbreaking and, frankly, inexcusable for a government that claims to value justice. The fear is that violence just continues unchecked if these specialized services shrink or disappear.
It's a stark picture. Now, given all this, has there been any pushback, any legal challenges to these federal actions?
Yes, there has been a significant development on the legal front. A federal judge actually stepped in and issued a temporary block.
A block on what specifically?
On the administration's limits on domestic violence, grants specifically those parts related to promoting diversity, equity, inclusion, or transgender rights.
So the court is saying, hold on, you can't restrict funding based on that.
Essentially, yes, for now. The court order is compelling the administration to restore the flow of those funds. It's a really crucial, though maybe temporary, win for these organizations. It offers some breathing room.
Some immediate relief, then.
Definitely. But, and this is important, despite that court ruling, a lot of organizations are still very cautious.
Why? If the funds are flowing again?
Because they know this temporary block doesn't necessarily mean the larger review is over, or that the administration's overall goal has changed. It addresses one part of the issue, but the broader uncertainty about future funding and potential restrictions remains. The legal fight likely isn't over.
Okay, that makes sense. It's a temporary fix, not a fundamental shift yet.
Right.
So, stepping back a bit, why are these groups so reliant on federal money in the first place? Is there a backstory here?
Oh, absolutely. There's a definite historical context. You have to go back to 1994 and the Violence Against Women Act, VWA.
Right, VWA.
Yeah.
Landmark legislation.
It was, and bipartisan, too. It was critical because it really formalized federal support for domestic violence programs. in a structured way that just hadn't existed before. Before VWA, funding was much more patchwork.
So VWA was a good thing, obviously.
Absolutely. But an unintended consequence was that it created this strong reliance on federal funding streams for these organizations. It made them sort of structurally vulnerable to shifts in federal policy and budgets, like what we're seeing now.
So it created a vital pipeline, but also made the faucet controllable by whoever's in charge federally.
That's a good way to put it. And there's another piece to this puzzle.
What's that?
It's about private funding, or rather, the lack of it. Research, like from the Equitable Giving Lab, consistently shows something pretty shocking.
Okay.
Less than 2% of all charitable giving in the U.S. goes to initiatives specifically for women and girls.
Less than 2%? Seriously?
Seriously. So when federal funding gets shaky, these organizations often don't have a big cushion of private donations or foundation grants to fall back on. They're disproportionately reliant on government money.
That paints a picture of systemic under-resourcing, even beyond government actions.
It really does. It makes them incredibly susceptible to these kinds of policy changes.
You know, despite all this pressure, this uncertainty, it's pretty remarkable to hear about organizations digging in their heels.
It is. There's incredible resilience there.
Like Amanda Katz at JCATA, that's a group serving the Jewish community in D.C., facing intimate partner violence. She apparently said they're keeping their website up and will keep serving everyone, regardless of gender identity, sexual orientation, immigration status.
Even with so much federal funding potentially on the line for them.
Yeah, apparently federal funds make up a huge chunk of their budget, like $1.7 million out of $2.1 million annually.
Wow. That takes real conviction.
It really does. It shows an unwavering commitment to their mission, despite the risks.
Yeah.
So, as we wrap up here, what we've really seen is this fundamental tension, right? On one hand, you have the administration trying to steer federal money according to its specific priorities and ideology.
Mm-hmm.
And on the other, you have these absolutely critical services for victims of violence, especially for marginalized groups who might not have anywhere else to turn.
And the uncertainty for these nonprofits is just ongoing. It's about reimbursement, about whether they can use approved funds as intended, about whether they can even fulfill their mission without having to compromise their values or who they serve. It's a really tough spot.
It leaves you thinking, doesn't it? In a society where these essential services for vulnerable people depend so much on federal dollars, what's our collective responsibility here? As citizens, as communities, maybe even private funders, how do we make sure these life-saving programs can survive, regardless of who's in power or what ideological battles are being fought? How do we protect the most vulnerable when their support system itself becomes a kind of battleground?